Welcome to Fertilish, the podcast where we get real about fertility, infertility, and everything in between. I'm Laura.
And I'm Brandis. And whether you're knee-deep in treatments, just starting to ask questions, or somewhere in the ish of it all, you're in the right place.
Here we ditch the stigma, break down the science, and have candid conversations about the messy, emotional, and sometimes hilarious journey to growing a family and preserving your fertility.
So grab your coffee, your meds, or just your curiosity, and let's get into it.
Brandis, welcome back to another episode of Fertilish. Super excited to be back for episode number 11.
I know. It's crazy that we are on 11 already. But today we are talking all about the trying to conceive acronyms because there are so many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is like a whole new world when you start diving into, TTC.
Yes. And I actually remember a couple years ago, a while ago now, when I first shadowed here, I was listening to one of the nurse practitioners on a follow-up talk, and hearing her talk about a low-level mosaic and a euploid, and it's like, okay, I went to school and I have no idea what you're talking about.
Didn't cover
like,
that part.
What is a low-level mosaic? And like, it's a whole new world, and then I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then, I would like search on Instagram for, people that worked in this community or were going through it, and would see all their hashtags, and it was like, what? And their acronyms, and it's like, what is it? Like, I have no idea what anyone is talking about. And I hear that from patients too, that when you first get into this kind of fertility and fertility world, there are so many different acronyms. And it's just wild.
Well, and even maybe terms that like are used like that, that you're used to them being used in a world outside of this world, and they mean something different in this world. So maybe you've heard the actual term before or the acronym, but it may mean something different now. It's a lot to cover.
Just like WTF we talked about before, or a WTF talk, and it's like, that means something, which it kind of can still. But,
sure.
Usually that's why did my transfer fail, or why did my treatment fail talk. And so, things could mean something different on the outside, and then you come here and it means something different. So
yeah, absolutely. So today we're going to dive into lots of different ones, what they mean,
Well, and this will be kind of a little bit of a different episode because there are so many. So I think we'll start out with, and I have some kind of jotted down here, start out with some basic ones of when you're first kind of getting into this world. Let me find it. So you brought TTC up. So obviously that one is trying to conceive. How do you want to do this? Do you want to like go do one section, I'll do another, or how do you?
Sure, yeah.
And different.
I was going to mention on trying to conceive, obviously that could be like with or without the use of fertility treatment. So that could be like trying to conceive without any fertility treatment or ART, where you're just, trying at home without any interventions whatsoever. That could
ART,
be.
right?
Yes, ART. Sorry, that artificial reproductive technology, so that would be like IVF. I guess IUI is included in that, and then and maybe even like do we consider like medicated cycles? So with Ovidril.
I guess it could be considered that.
Okay.
So any reproductive assistance, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Okay. So that could be a whole host of different like ways to get to conception. So trying to conceive, just actively trying to conceive.
Okay, and then the next one's either the BFP and the BFN, which stands for big fat positive or big fat negative in relation to a pregnancy test. And whether obviously that's kind of whatever treatment you've been through, with at-home pregnancy tests or blood tests. That's kind of what those stand for.
Not sure how it got big and fat, but but yeah, that's what we call it.
So that is that one. Let's see some cycle ones. DPO, days past ovulation. CD, and we use this a lot in our notes, so cycle day. And I think it's also helpful to mention that cycle day 1 is considered the first day of full menstrual flow.
Yes.
So not spotting, but full flow. And then that continues on through your next period, really. So, sometimes people will say, well, I only have 6 cycle days. Well, that continues. So cycle day 15 doesn't mean you're still having a cycle.
Like you're still actively bleeding,
but you're still in the process of a whole menstrual cycle, if that makes sense to you guys. So it can go, that can have a range, but that's what CD is.
And the average cycle length is what, 28 to 32 days?
Yeah.
It's around 30
days.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just
others.
going to say that, like if you're having cycles, I think it's good to mention that if you're having cycles, that are 45 days or, that's something that you definitely would like to bring up to your provider, either your OBGYN or if you're seeing a fertility specialist. That's something that is definitely noteworthy, is to let them know, how long that actual cycle is from the first full day of bleeding, so active bleeding, so the first full flow day to the next day. So cycle day 1 starts over when you start full flow again.
Yeah. And it's not normal necessarily so I always tell people, if I give you a calendar, you should be able to point within a few days when your next period is going to start. So that's what regular means. And so you're always within 2 to 3 days of when it started last month. So if you are having, one cycle that's 35 days, and then one is 48, and then one is 22, and then one is 35, even though you're consistently getting periods, that's technically not considered regular. That would be considered an irregular cycle. So, something important to know.
Absolutely. And so that your provider can kind of do a deep dive in, are you on medications that's causing irregularity, or is there, an underlying like physiological issue? Is it contributed from, another illness, like COVID, I know people who, or the flu, sometimes can kind of throw your cycle off a little bit, or if you've started a new medication, sometimes some medications can have some impact on your cycles, and if they can rule those things out, then obviously they might want to do a deeper dive into what is causing that.
Yeah, for sure. So important to know kind of what's normal, what's not, how cycles are measured. Let's see, ovulation predictor kit, OPKs, and then I read this one, and I feel like I've seen it on some of the like Instagram comments where people will put BD. Did you know what that one was?
Yes, people. I like personally don't use this one. I don't know why. It just like it's like not how I describe sex, but I don't know. It just like I think I just use the words intercourse, but but I see this a lot. Is to use the acronym BD for baby dance, especially in TTC groups. And people are like, let's say you're doing timed intercourse, then I'll see people say like, we were advised to BD on XYZ days, or if you're getting ready for an egg retrieval and you're on medication, like maybe, they might say like, we were advised against BDing for, X amount of time. And so I do see that a lot in like different Facebook specifically groups.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes I'm like, did you make that up? Because I'm pretty sure that you guys just invented this. Hormones and kind of all of our tests are also another different world. And I know, something a lot of people get confused on is HSG, SHG, SIS, and those are all, those are different tests.
Yeah.
So HSG, we've talked a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
Hysterosalpingogram is where we put the dye in the fallopian tubes and look with the type of X-ray to make sure you at least have a tube open. If
Right.
you're doing a treatment plan that uses tubes.
Mm-hmm.
And then a saline sonogram is also called a sonohistogram, is also called an SIS, is also called an SHG. And those are all the same
Not
thing.
to be confusing at all.
Not to be confused also with the HSG.
That's right.
That is where we put saline into the uterus and then look with ultrasound to make sure that there is no fibroids, polyps, anything in the uterus that can kind of affect an embryo implanting. I remember when I first worked here, I was like, what? Why does it have so many names? Like,
Right.
why is that so confusing? And it is something people get confused with a lot. So,
Yeah, and I agree. Like I frequently, for whatever reason, use the term SHG, and I will have patients that say like, oh no, they told me I needed an SIS, and so then and a lot of people don't know that those are the same test and that they do have two names and thus two acronyms.
yes.
And so I think that can be a little confusing. Like, why does it have two names?
And HSC, or a hysteroscopy, is where we put an actual camera in the uterus, and are able to kind of look with our eyes and see kind of what's going on. And occasionally that'll be like with a polypectomy or where we're removing something. So for a recap, HSG, tubes, dye with fallopian tubes, hysterosalpingogram. To look in the uterus with ultrasound, it's a saline sonogram, sonohysterogram, SHG, and SIS. And then to look in the uterus with the camera, HSC, hysteroscopy.
I'm gonna come up with a fun, catchy way to, or a song
Remember
or a
that.
jingle or something. Yeah, to remember all these. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think on it, but I'm gonna come back with one.
That's a hard one. That took me a while, I think. Treatment wise, so obviously there's hormones. So AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, that's one of our most important tests here, I think, that we do, and that gives us an idea of your ovarian reserve.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually where, so I guess to kind of explain AMH, I think about it as you have a vault of eggs, and the more eggs you have in that vault, the more eggs come out every month. The less eggs you have, the less eggs come out in your ovaries every month. One will go on ovulation, and then the rest of them will die off. And the eggs that come out have little cells around them called granulosa cells, and those produce AMH. And so we know that if you're putting out a lot of follicles or a lot of eggs every month, then you must have a lot of eggs in the vault. If you're putting out fewer, then you have fewer eggs in that vault. And so with IVF, we're limited to the amount of eggs that you're putting out. So that's why AMH is kind of so important to kind of know where you're at. Also important to know that number can fluctuate up or down by up to 30% from month to month. So sometimes you may put out 10 eggs. The next month you may put out 6. The next month you may put out 15. So that's why that number goes up and down, and we only really recommend checking it like once a year.
Yeah, cool. And even then can fluctuate.
Mm-hmm.
Mine personally, from one year to the next, it dropped a small amount, and then most recently I had it checked, and it was like higher than before, and I was like, I was so excited.
Yeah.
But it's just so weird how it like does fluctuate from even like month to month, and going back to like what you said about like eggs, like if you're getting ready for an egg retrieval,
Mm-hmm.
like your antral follicle count, so AFC can fluctuate from month to month, from cycle to cycle. And I've personally had that happen as well. Like, like I was going in actually not too long ago for an SHG, and my antral follicle count was like higher than it had been in a while, and I was just like, oh, this would have been a great month for an egg retrieval.
Yeah, I know, and so many things can impact it. I remember when I froze my eggs, and I have PCOS, so I have a pretty high count, and then I had got COVID, and then I went and checked my count, my antral follicle count that next month, and it was like cut in half. I like hardly had any follicle, and I was like, you're kidding me. And it took a full like 3 months for my follicle count to go back to what it was pre-COVID.
Crazy.
And so, yeah, different things can affect it. And if I had checked my AMH the month it was cut in half, I probably would have freaked out because it probably would have dipped. And so, super important to know that it does go up and down.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, if you have questions or concerns about like yours fluctuating from time period to time period, I think that's important to kind of talk to your provider about, like, you know, is this like a normal fluctuation or is this something I should have concern about?
Yeah, no, for sure. Hormones, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. So obviously we want to make sure thyroid is where it should be. For fertility purposes, we do usually keep it 0.5 to 2.5, and every clinic is different. So some people, you know, as long as you're within a normal range, may say it's fine.
And it can fluctuate with like stimulation medication, like when you are, you know, taking medication for an egg retrieval, you know, those hormones that you're taking for the egg retrieval can cause some fluctuations with your TSH.
Same thing with transfer meds. I get that a lot. And important to know that if we put you on medication, I'm not checking that level again until 3 to 4 weeks later after you've started taking that dose or switch the dose, because it can take that long for it to kind of work and affect that TSH. So sometimes people will say, you know, I started this med last week and now it's my transfer day. Can we check it again? And a lot of the times we'll say, well, we want to wait until you've been on it for so long so we can make sure it's working, because if we check it now and the level's still high, it's not because that med's not working, it just hasn't kicked in yet. So,
and it's not necessarily that you need to be on that medication long term or that you have, you know, any thyroid issues going on outside of that particular cycle. It just may have, you know, fluctuated due to like this tertiary thing over here. And, you know, once you're out of a cycle, obviously, if there's any concerns, we'll have you follow up with your PCP. And have them monitor it. But it's possible that it could have been exclusive to, you know, going through fertility treatment.
Yeah, hormones for sure can change that. LH, luteinizing hormone, that is the hormone that spikes when you ovulate. So that's the hormone we are checking with those OPKs, or ovulation predictor kits. So once you have a mature follicle, your LH, or your luteinizing hormone, will spike, causing that egg to ovulate, and then it will continue to pulse throughout the luteal phase to kind of stimulate that corpus luteum, or the follicle that egg leaves behind, to produce progesterone to support a pregnancy if you get pregnant. So that's what LH is. E2, P4. So E2 is estrogen, P4 is progesterone. Those are pretty straightforward, just hormones of the menstrual cycle. Let's see, what other, do you know any labs that you can think of or that were confusing to you? I think those are
that's kind of the gamut ones. The ones that we're going to run that may pertain to
PRL, prolactin. I don't think I've really seen that on threads, though, other than it may show up that way on your paperwork. RE, reproductive endocrinologist. That's a fertility doctor that specializes in reproductive endocrinology and infertility, or REI. Reproductive immunologist, which is a doctor that specializes in immunology and the immune system for pregnancy. That's RI. We're going to start with treatment talk, or what things, all the treatments we offer, and what those acronyms are kind of for.
Yeah. So IUI is intrauterine insemination. That is where we are taking sperm and injecting that into the uterus. And that can, you know, that's an in-office procedure, and may not be the most appropriate treatment for each person. But it's definitely an applicable option for some of our patients, so it's definitely kind of I guess, less invasive than IVF. But again, not applicable for every patient, but definitely an option that's, a little less costly, a little less
Yeah.
invasive.
So good for male factor. Sometimes those with PCOS. So we could either use your natural cycle or have you ovulate on your own. And then, so these are different from at-home inseminations. Instead of putting it just in the vagina, we're actually putting a catheter through the cervix, and we inject sperm into the uterus. And the caveat, you have to have at least one open tube, obviously, for that to work. And then I like to have 20 million sperm pre-wash, and then at least 10 million sperm post-wash. So not everybody's a candidate, but that's what IUI is.
Can you explain like what pre and post wash means?
Yeah, so pre-wash is basically before, I'm trying to think how to put this in terms, they kind of spin it down and separate it and wash it, I guess, basically separate everything. So when they're just looking down at the microscope, there should be at least 20 million in the way they count it. And then once they kind of spin it down, I guess would be the way to say it, there should be
get like
10
the
million.
Hardier, healthier sperm. Okay.
There should be kind of 10 million in there.
Okay.
If there's not enough, even though it only takes one sperm, it does take more to kind of even get to the egg, because not all of them will even make it there. So we still want counts to be high. So if it's lower, or you don't have an open tube, then obviously you would not be a candidate.
And you need to be able to like ovulate, I guess, for IUI.
Yeah, and so some people, especially those with PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, won't obviously ovulate, and they won't respond to letrozole. So sometimes we call that refractory PCOS. Occasionally we can add injectable medications, those we use with IVF, called gonadotropins with IUI, but it puts you at a higher risk of multiples, and so that would result in canceled cycles. So usually with those patients, they are doing IVF.
Okay.
IVF, in vitro fertilization.
Yeah. So in vitro fertilization is where we are, generally giving some medications to stimulate the ovaries to not only grow multiple follicles, but hopefully to synchronize those follicles so that way when we retrieve them, that you'll have multiple follicles that have mature eggs in them. So the follicle kind of houses the egg. And then once we retrieve those eggs, we are taking them into our embryology lab, and we are fertilizing them with sperm, either from your partner or a donor. And then we allow those eggs to grow to become embryos anywhere from day 3, day 5, 6, or 7. So day 3 being called the cleavage stage, day 5, 6, or 7 being called blastocyst. And then from there, we are either freezing them or transferring them, or biopsying them for genetic testing and freezing the majority of the embryo. So when you are testing, like doing, PGT testing, genetic testing, we're biopsying a small portion of the embryo and then sending that biopsied specimen off to the genetic testing lab, and then we're freezing the rest of that embryo, and it remains in our cryopreservation, so that later, once you have a report and you can kind of see, which embryos are genetically normal and which embryos, if you're interested in knowing the sex and transferring based on those reasons, then you're able to transfer an embryo that hopefully is genetically normal of the sex that you have a preference for. If you don't have a preference for sex, you just want to know that embryo is genetically normal.
And you bring up even more kind of acronyms with IVF. So you can have a fresh transfer, which we've kind of talked about in an episode, which is sometimes referred to as ET, just embryo transfer. An FET, which is a frozen embryo transfer, which again we've kind of covered, where we're putting the embryo back in the uterus. So with IVF, we have eggs and sperm, put them together in a lab, and then put them in the uterus. So we're bypassing tubes totally. PGT, you brought up pre-implantation genetic testing, where we are the different types of PGT. So PGT-A, which stands for aneuploidy, which, like you said, we're checking to make sure that there's a correct number of chromosomes and that the embryo, the sex of the embryo, if that's something you want to know. It'll either come back euploid, meaning normal, high-level mosaic, which is HLM, meaning that, there were more abnormal cells in the sample than normal, low-level mosaic, meaning there was a mix of normal and abnormal, but probably more normal, which is LLM, and then aneuploid, which is just abnormal. So what did we talk about? We said transfers, PGT, ICSI is another part of IVF.
Yeah, so that is a form of like fertilizing an egg, and something that we use standard here at CNY unless a patient requests not to. So we are, our embryologists are taking a healthy sperm and injecting that into an egg to hopefully fertilize, versus, I guess, traditional IVF, which is where you've got an egg in essentially a petri dish, and you are allowing the sperm to be in the dish with the egg, in hopes that the sperm will find the egg and fertilize and grow to become an embryo.
Yeah, and ICSI is, some people will say ICSI. We just say ICSI. It stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and it's like Laura said, we are actually injecting the sperm in the egg. And that is a way that DNA fragmentation is treated. So people, will ask, should I do a DNA fragmentation test? And it's like, you can, but the way to treat that, if there isn't there, is ICSI. And we're automatically doing it with people. So, again, it's something that you would opt out of if it's something you didn't want.
Yeah, and along with the ICSI, you may be given the option, well, it's always an option at CNY, of using Zymot, which is a device that allows the sperm to essentially like swim through to see like, I guess the best swimmers, like what comes out on the other side.
They inject the sperm into this like membrane, this device called Zymot. And actually, I always tell people, if you type in on TikTok, like Zymot, there's all kinds of embryologists or andrologists that'll like do videos. But they incubate it, and then supposedly the best sperm are supposed to make it to the top of this device, and you have to have a certain count for it to work, because if you have a low count, not all the sperm may make it through this membrane. But then they pick out the sperm that make it to the top of the membrane, and it's supposed to be like the best sperm so that's the sperm they use to fertilize. Yeah,
and there's like it's something that we offer, anyone can add on at CNY, and I've not ever heard of anything like any negative outcome that could come from it. And it's like super like cost effective, it's like $200. And so, I think that like as an organization, we're like, it's a good thing.
Yeah. So
I know we used it on our last egg retrieval, and we'll use it again. And I know that obviously results may vary, but we had 100% fertilization with Zymot.
Oh, so that's cool. I know studies, some of them that I read, had shown a decrease in miscarriage rates. So that's kind of a cool thing too.
And that makes sense, because so many people don't realize that like sperm can affect miscarriage. We think of that as being like a woman's issue, or something that's caused, by something going on with a woman's or female's body. And that's not accurate. Sperm can cause miscarriages. And so, I'm glad you brought that up.
That, and then even like with IVF, so it's the egg's job technically to get the embryo to that day 3 stage. And then after the day 3 stage, it's the sperm's job to kick in to get it to the blastocyst stage. So strong sperm is important. And I was even seeing like some studies now that are showing, how sick you are with morning sickness or pregnancy sickness, how your pregnancy goes is largely influenced by the quality of sperm. And there are all these studies coming out now, and I'm like, oh, see, it wasn't just us.
We always get the
plays a huge role. So, how healthy because sperm regenerates every 3 months. So how healthy that the person is can, affect how your pregnancy goes. So interesting.
Yeah, I think because I think as a society, we only think of like the sperm, like being responsible for actual conception and not anything past that, and that anything past the actual point of conception is like a female issue. And there's so many more like realizations, especially in the last like even 5 years, that's not true. That it is two completely different sets of DNA coming together, and there's responsibility, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. And so let's see what other IVF. The 5 days post 5-day transfer, 3 days post 5-day transfer. So that's written out as, depending on your number, 5DP. Let's see, I have it written. 5DT. So those stands for kind of, again, however many days you are past, and then whatever embryo you transferred. So it could be 9 days post 3-day transfer, and that looks confusing when it's written out.
It is. Yeah, it is, especially whenever they're like 5 and 5 or 5. Yeah. So then if you had a 3-day embryo, it would be like 5DP 3DT.
And I think when I first saw that, it was somebody that had pregnancy tests all lined up, and it was like 3 days post 5-day transfer, 4 days post 5-day transfer, 5 days post 5-day transfer, and it's their pregnancy tests in a line that they had written out to watch the line get darker to make sure that they were pregnant.
So guilty. But I like didn't write the things out beside it when I like had them taped to notebook, and I didn't write the things out beside it, and so like having to process and think about writing them like all at one time was complete overload.
See, yeah. And so when people do that, or I've seen them, it gets intricate. They'll like test out their HCG wash, with their uterine wash, which we'll have to talk about in an episode. But because they have pregnancy hormone in the uterus, and so they'll test it out. So the line will be dark, it'll go light, and then they'll watch it get dark again, and then go darker. I'm like, you guys, that is so intricate. That would stress me out. But
you brought you brought up another acronym, HCG. So HCG is the hormone that your body produces when you are pregnant.
Yes.
And but it's also in some medications. So like a trigger injection, some trigger injections can have HCG in them. We do HCG washes so that way your body kind of already has some of the hormone in there and kind of starts to prepare for the embryo even before the embryo starts to implant, to kind of get your body in this like pregnancy mode. And so, yeah, there's, I guess synthetic forms of HCG, and then that's the pregnancy hormone. So like that's what we're testing for when you go for like a beta, what we call a beta.
Yeah.
So like beta HCG, that's what we're testing for. And there's 2 different types of those. So there's qualitative and quantitative. And so we're doing the quantitative so that way we're actually getting the number. Qualitative is essentially just a yes or no.
Yeah.
And then that is the hormone that Clear Blue or First Response or whatever, pick your poison.
Yeah.
What they're testing for in your urine. So you can test for it in blood and urine.
Yeah, and that's the human chorionic gonadotropin, and like she said, HCG beta, and people sometimes just call it my beta. So that's kind of what that is. As far as like things you can have, we talked about PCOS. Endo usually stands for endometriosis. I've never heard someone use that for like endometritis. So usually that's, for endometriosis. OHSS, or ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, that can happen with IVF treatment. So we're stimulating a lot of eggs to grow. And so those eggs put off estrogen. And like we've talked about in episodes before, that estrogen, where it's normally 200 to 300 in a cycle, is getting into the hundreds to thousands range. And so, you can have, your ovaries are big, so you can have some bloating. It can cause your vessels to get leaky when estrogen is high. So you have third spacing of fluid, just meaning fluid is in spaces where it shouldn't be. You can, it can affect your blood. So blood clots can happen. You can get fluid where it shouldn't be in the lungs. And so usually if we're having OHSS, it's very mild. But it can be serious and life-threatening, so we have protocols that we do to manage and keep that away, and that's probably for another episode on its own, but that's what OHSS stands for, is ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome.
I was thinking of like different ones that maybe we didn't have before, so like ERA.
Oh, yeah. And, I've heard, so ERA, and I've heard people use it different ways, like endometrial receptivity analysis, and so basically what that is, and we've talked about it in an episode on transfers, but basically what it's doing is making sure that we put you through a transfer, a medicated mock transfer usually, to make sure that the progesterone timing is right. So we want to make sure that at the time we're doing the biopsy, when we would have otherwise been doing the transfer, that you have that the endometrium is receptive to an embryo. So some people, 75% of us will be receptive at the time that we should be, which is 120 plus or minus 3 hours, which means that the other 25% of us will either be receptive, pre-receptive, or post-receptive, meaning that we needed a couple more hours of progesterone or a few hours less. And so that helps us kind of adjust transfer timing. And again, not a first-line test, more of a recurrent implantation failure test, but yeah, that's what that one is.
I was thinking about like others. Med acronyms that I see people use in groups. So like MENO, like I can't talk, MENO, is for Menopur. So that's, a stimulation medication. FOL for Follistim. Again, another stimulation medication. PROG, or PIO.
Progesterone and oil.
And that can be in a variety of different oils. I think the number one way that people generally are going to get that is in sesame oil. You may be given, I personally use progesterone and ethyl oleate because I have a little allergy for that was. It like makes me have this like weird rash on my face or whatever. So I started using ethyl oleate. But yeah, I think the main one that people are going to generally get when they get progesterone in oil is going to be sesame oil. What other forms of that does it come in?
Ethyl oleate. Honestly, that's the one I feel like there's one more, but I feel like mostly we've used the in oil and then the ethyl oleate. I don't think we've ever had to switch from one of those. Usually if you have an allergy to one, the other one is okay.
Yeah.
And actually ERA is, I say endometrial receptivity analysis because that's what it is, but it's endometrial receptivity array.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
But that's what that is. And then another med, HGH, human growth hormone. Omnitrope is a common one we use to kind of help. It can help with egg quality. Not everyone is a candidate, but that's another one. Ovarian PRP, platelet-rich plasma, where we kind of take your blood, spin it down, and inject it either into an ovary, kind of like an egg retrieval. We have PRP uterine washes, high-volume PRP washes, and so, again, maybe an episode on immune kind of protocols, but so I think those are a lot of the main acronyms. Can you think of any more?
I see SA for semen analysis quite often.
Oh yeah, that's one.
ER for egg retrieval.
Yes, or OPU. That's another one that people use for egg retrieval. I think we've hit a lot of them.
And that's oocyte pickup. Is that correct?
No, it's oocyte, and I don't even say it enough to have it off the top of my head. It's I've heard it says ovum pickup or oocyte pickup, but I feel like I've heard somebody say it in a different way. And now it's not going to come up.
Well, of course.
No. There was one fertility doctor that we had here, and he was talking about, he's like, oh, in the olden days, we used to say OPU, but it stood for, no, I'm not going to be able to find it. And who knows, maybe that was just a him thing, actually, because it does say ovum pickup, but he, like, had this big old explanation for what OPU was, and he would only ever use OPU. But,
okay.
Let's see what else that might, I feel like those are the main things that I can think of for this, but there are so many acronyms out there, and like Laura said, they can mean different things out in the world and then
right.
mean totally different things in fertility. So
yeah, for sure. And so we would love to hear like acronyms that you like have heard that maybe we didn't mention on today's show, either by your provider, in different groups, other patients that you like might find intriguing or just a little wild if we didn't mention them on today's show, or things that you might just use personally, like as you've kind of gone through your journey, you've kind of adopted little acronyms for different things, and we would love to hear from you on our website, cnyfertility.com/fertilish. There is a jot form there that you can kind of leave us a message. Those messages always come directly to me and Brandis, or you can DM us on our Instagram, fertilish. And we would love to hear what interesting ones we didn't cover today, or ones you think that should be acronyms. Like, if you've made up your own and you think that these should be popular, widely used acronyms, let us know. We can put those out there for you and get that started. And then obviously subscribe, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast. And we'll be back for another episode next Tuesday. You definitely want to tune in. I think this is kind of something for everyone. And it is how to support your loved ones going through fertility treatment. And in my head, I really want this to be an episode that you don't have to say anything. You can just send the episode to a loved one and be like, hey, I would really like for you to listen to this. So we'd love for you to tune in next week.
Yeah. So we will see you guys next week.
All right. Bye-bye.